Frithjof Schuon, UN. German. फ़ʀiːt́joːf UN. Sarnur ad-Dīn ḥmmad. al-Mālikī. ash-Shādhilī ad-Darqāwī al-ʿAlawī al-Maryamī. June 18, 1907 – May 5, 1998, was a German author born in Switzerland. He was a philosopher and metaphysicist inspired by the Hindu philosophy of Advaita Vedanta, and the author of numerous books on religion and spirituality. He was also a poet and a painter. Schuon was recognized during his lifetime as a world authority on philosophy, spirituality and religion, and was an exponent of the religio perennis, perennial religion, inspired by Advaita Vedanta, and one of the chief representatives of the perennialist school. Though he was not officially affiliated with the academic world, his writings have been noticed in scholarly and philosophical journals, and by scholars of comparative religion and spirituality. Criticism of the relativism of the modern academic world is one of the main aspects of Schuon's teachings. In his teachings, Schuon expresses his faith in an absolute principle, God, who governs the universe and to whom our souls would return after death. For Schuon, the great revelations are the link between this absolute principle, God, and mankind. He wrote the main bulk of his work in French. In the later years of his life, Schuon composed some volumes of poetry in his mother tongue, German. His articles in French were collected in about 20 titles in French, which were later translated into English as well as many other languages. The main subjects of his prose as well as his poetic compositions are metaphysical doctrine and spiritual method, life and work. Schuon was born in Basel, Switzerland, on June 18, 1907. His father was a native of southern Germany, while his mother came from an Alsatian family. Schuon's father was a concert violinist, and the household was one in which not only music but literary and spiritual culture were present. Schuon lived in Basel and attended school there until the untimely death of his father, after which his mother returned with her two young sons to her family in nearby Mulhouse, France, where Schuon was obliged to become a French citizen. Having received his earliest training in German, he received his later education in French and thus mastered both languages early in life. From his youth, Schuon's search for metaphysical truth led him to read the Hindu scriptures such as Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita. While still living in Mulhouse, he discovered the works of René Guénon, the French philosopher and Orientalist, which served to confirm his intellectual intuitions and which provided support for the metaphysical principles he had begun to discover. Schuon journeyed to Paris after serving for a year and a half in the French army. There he worked as a textile designer and began to study Arabic in the local mosque school. Living in Paris also brought the opportunity to be exposed to various forms of traditional art to a much greater degree than before, especially the arts of Asia, with which he had had a deep affinity since his youth. This period of growing intellectual and artistic familiarity with the traditional worlds was followed by Schuon's first visit to Algeria in 1932. It was then that he met the celebrated Sheikh Ahmad al-ʿAlawī and was initiated into his order. On a second trip to North Africa, in 1935, he visited Algeria and Morocco, and during 1938 and 1939 he traveled to Egypt, where he met Guénon, with whom he had been in correspondence for 27 years. In 1939, shortly after his arrival in Pai, India, World War II broke out, forcing him to return to Europe. After having served in the French army, and having been made a prisoner by the Germans, he sought asylum in Switzerland, which gave him Swiss nationality and was to be his home for 40 years. In 1949 he married, his wife being a German Swiss with a French education who, besides having interests in religion and metaphysics, was also a gifted painter. Following World War II, Schuon accepted an invitation to travel to the American West, where he lived for several months among the Plains Indians, in whom he always had a deep interest. Having received his education in France, Schuon has written all his major works in French, which began to appear in English translation in 1953. Of his first book, The Transcendent Unity of Religions, London, Faber and Faber. T.S. Eliot wrote, "I have met with no more impressive work in the comparative study of Oriental and Occidental religion." Quote, while always continuing to write, Schuon and his wife traveled widely. In 1959 and again in 1963, they journeyed to the American West at the invitation of friends among the Sioux and Crow American Indians. In the company of their Native American friends, they visited various Plains tribes and had the opportunity to witness many aspects of their sacred traditions. In 1959, Schuon and his wife were solemnly adopted into the Sioux family of James Red Cloud. Years later they were similarly adopted by the Crow medicine man and Sundance chief, Thomas Yellowtail. Schuon's writings on the central rites of Native American religion and his paintings of their ways of life attest to his particular affinity with the spiritual universe of the Plains Indians. Other travels have included journeys to Andalusia, Morocco, and a visit in 1968 to the reputed home of the Virgin Mary in Ephesus. Through his many books and articles, Schuon became known as a spiritual teacher and leader of the traditionalist school. During his years in Switzerland he regularly received visits from well-known religious scholars and thinkers of the East. Schuon throughout his entire life had great respect for and devotion to the Virgin Mary, which was expressed in his writings. As a result, his teachings and paintings show a particular Marian presence. His reverence for the Virgin Mary has been studied in detail by American professor James Cutzinger, hence the name Maryamī, in Arabic, Marian, of the Sufi order he founded as a branch of the ʃādhilī ad-Darqāwī al-ʿAlawī. When asked by one of his disciples about the reason for this choice of name, Schuon replied, "It is not we who have chosen her. It is she who has chosen us." Quote, in 1980, Schuon and his wife emigrated to the United States, settling in Bloomington, Indiana, where a community of disciples from all over the world would gather around him for spiritual direction. The first years in Bloomington saw the publication of some of his most important late works, From the Divine to the Human, To Have a Center, Survey of Metaphysics and Esotericism, and others. Schuon continued to write poetry in his native German, to receive visitors and maintain a busy correspondence with followers, scholars and readers until his death in 1998. Views based on his written works. Transcendent Unity of Religions. The traditionalist or perennialist perspective began to be enunciated in the 1920s by the French philosopher René Guénon and, in the 1930s, by Schuon himself. The Harvard Orientalist Ananda Coomaraswamy and the Swiss art historian Titus Burckhardt also became prominent advocates of this point of view. Fundamentally, this doctrine is the Sanatana Dharma, the eternal religion, of Hindu Neo-Vedanta. It was supposedly formulated in ancient Greece, in particular, by Plato and later Neoplatonists, and in Christendom by Meister Eckhart, in the West, and Gregory Palamas, in the East. Every religion has, besides its literal meaning, an esoteric dimension, which is essential, primordial and universal. This intellectual universality is one of the hallmarks of Schuon's works, and it gives rise to insights into not only the various spiritual traditions, but also history, science and art. The dominant theme or principle of Schuon's writings was foreshadowed in his early encounter with a black marabout who had accompanied some members of his Senegalese village to Switzerland in order to demonstrate their culture. When the young Schuon talked with him, the venerable old man drew a circle with radii on the ground and explained, "God is in the center. All paths led to him." Metaphysics. For Schuon, the quintessence of pure metaphysics can be summarized by the following Vedantic statement. Although the Advaita Vedanta's perspective finds its equivalent in the teachings of Ibn Arabi, Meister Eckhart Plotinus, Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya Jivo Brahma Eva Napara. Brahman is real. The world is illusory. The self is not different from Brahman. The metaphysics exposited by Schuon is based on the doctrine of the non-dual absolute, beyond being, and the degrees of reality. The distinction between the absolute and the relative corresponds for Schuon to the couple Atma, Maya. Maya is not only the cosmic illusion. From a higher standpoint, Maya is also the infinite, the divine relativity or else the feminine aspect, Mahashakti, of the supreme principle. Said differently, being the absolute, beyond being is also the sovereign good, Agathan, that by its nature desires to communicate itself through the projection of Maya. The whole manifestation from the first being, Ishvara, to matter, Prakriti, the lower degree of reality, is indeed the projection of the supreme principle, Brahman. The personal God, considered as the creative cause of the world, is only relatively absolute, a first determination of beyond being. At the summit of Maya, the supreme principle is not only beyond being, it is also the supreme self, Atman, and in its innermost essence, the intellect, Buddhi, that is the ray of consciousness shining down, the axial refraction of Atma within Maya. Spiritual path. According to Schuon, the spiritual path is essentially based on the discernment between the real and the unreal, Atma, Maya, concentration on the real, and the practice of virtues. Human beings must know the truth. Knowing the truth, they must then will the good and concentrate on it. These two aspects correspond to the metaphysical doctrine and the spiritual method. Knowing the truth and willing the good, human beings must finally love beauty in their own soul through virtue, but also in nature. In this respect, Schuon has insisted on the importance for the authentic spiritual seeker to be aware of what he called the metaphysical transparency of phenomena. Schuon wrote about different aspects of spiritual life both on the doctrinal and on the practical levels. He explained the forms of the spiritual practices as they have been manifested in various traditional universes. In particular, he wrote on the invocation of the divine name, Dhikr, Japa Yoga, the prayer of the heart, considered by Hindus as the best and most providential means of realization at the end of the Kali Yuga, as has been noted by the Hindu saint Ramakrishna. The secret of the invocatory path is that God and His name are one. Schuon's views are in harmony with traditional Islamic teachings of the primacy of remembrance of God, as emphasized by Sheikh al-ʿAlawī in the following passage. Remembrance, Dhikr, is the most important rule of the religion. The law was not imposed upon us nor the rites of worship ordained except for the sake of establishing the remembrance of God. Decree. The Prophet said, the circumambulation, tawaf, around the holy house, the passage to and fro between the hills of Safa and Marwa, and the throwing of the pebbles on three pillars symbolizing the devil, were ordained only for the sake of the remembrance of God. And God Himself has said, in the Quran, remember God at the holy monument. Thus we know that the rite that consists in stopping there was ordained for remembrance and not specifically for the sake of the monument itself. Just as the halt at Muna was ordained for remembrance and not because of the valley. Furthermore God, has said on the subject of the ritual prayer, "Perform the prayer in remembrance of me." In a word, our performance of the rites is considered ardent or lukewarm according to the degree of our remembrance of God while performing them. Thus, when the prophet was asked which spiritual strivers would receive the greatest reward, he replied, "Those who have remembered God most." And when asked which fasters would receive the greatest reward, he replied, "Those who have remembered God most." And when the prayer and the almsgiving and the pilgrimage and the charitable donations were mentioned, he said each time, "The richest in remembrance of God is the richest in reward." Single quote. Quintessential esotericism. Schuon had pointed out at the beginning of the 20th century that every religion comprises two main aspects: esotericism and exotericism. Schuon explained that the esotericism itself displays two aspects, one being an extension of exotericism and the other one independent of exotericism. For if it be true that the form is, in a certain way, the essence, the essence on the contrary is by no means totally expressed by a single form. The drop is water, but water is not the drop. This second aspect is called quintessential esotericism, for it is not limited or expressed totally by one single form or theological school and, above all, by a particular religious form as such. Criticism of modernity. Schuon had based his crisis of the modern world on the Hindu doctrine of cyclic nature of time. Schuon expanded on this concept and its consequences for humanity in many of his articles. In his essay, The Contradictions of Relativism, Schuon wrote that the uncompromising relativism that underlies many modern philosophies had fallen into an intrinsic absurdity in declaring that there is no absolute truth and then attempting to put this forward as an absolute truth. Schuon notes that the essence of relativism is found in the idea that we never escape from human subjectivity, whilst its expounders seem to remain unaware of the fact that relativism is therefore also deprived of any objectivity. Schuon further notes that the Freudian assertion that rationality is merely a hypocritical guise for a repressed animal drive results in the very assertion itself being devoid of worth, as it is itself a rational judgment. See also Bibliography. Books in English: Ad Astra and Stella Maris. Poems by Frithjof Schuon. World Wisdom. 2003. Autumn Leaves and the Ring. Poems by Frithjof Schuon. World Wisdom. 2010. Castes and Races. Perennial Books. 1959. 1982. Christianity, Islam. World Wisdom. 1985. New Translation. World Wisdom. 2008. Dimensions of Islam. 1969. Echoes of Perennial Wisdom. World Wisdom. 1992. Esotericism as Principle and as Way. Perennial Books. 1981. 1990. The Eye of the Heart. World Wisdom. 1997. The Feathered Sun. Plain Indians in Art and Philosophy. World Wisdom. 1990. Form and Substance in the Religions. World Wisdom. 2002. From the Divine to the Human. World Wisdom. 1982. New Translation. World Wisdom. 2013. Gnosis. Divine Wisdom. 1959. 1978. Perennial Books. 1990. New Translation. World Wisdom. 2006. Images of Primordial and Mystic Beauty. Paintings by Frithjof Schuon. Abodes. 1992. World Wisdom. In the Face of the Absolute. World Wisdom. 1989. 1994. In the Tracks of Buddhism. 1968. 1989. New Translation. Treasures of Buddhism. World Wisdom. 1993. Islam and the Perennial Philosophy. Scorpion Cavendish. 1976. Language of the Self. 1959. Revised edition. World Wisdom. 1999. Light on the Ancient Worlds. 1966. World Wisdom. 1984. New Translation. World Wisdom. 2006. Logic and Transcendence. 1975. Perennial Books. 1984. New Translation. World Wisdom. 2009. The Play of Masks. World Wisdom. 1992. Primordial Meditation. Contemplating the Real. The Matheson Trust. 2015. Translated from the original German. Road to the Heart. World Wisdom. 1995. Roots of the Human Condition. World Wisdom. 1991. New Translation. World Wisdom. 2002. Songs Without Names Volume. IV. World Wisdom. 2007. Songs Without Names 712. World Wisdom. 2007. Spiritual Perspectives and Human Facts. 1954. 1969. New Translation. World Wisdom. 2008. Stations of Wisdom. 1961. 1980. Revised Translation. World Wisdom. 1995. 2003. Sufism. Veil and Quintessence. World Wisdom. 1981. 2007. Survey of Metaphysics and Esotericism. World Wisdom. 1986. 2000. The Transcendent Unity of Religions. 1953. Revised edition. 1975. 1984. The Theosophical Publishing House. 1993. The Transfiguration of Man. World Wisdom. 1995. Treasures of Buddhism. In the Tracks of Buddhism. 1968. 1989. 1993. To Have a Center. World Wisdom. 1990. 2015. Understanding Islam. 1963. 1965. 1972. 1976. 1979. 1981. 1986. 1989. Revised Translation. World Wisdom. 1994. 1998. 2011. World Wheel Volume. I3. World Wisdom. 2007. World Wheel Volume. IV7. World Wisdom. 2007. Anthologies. Art from the Sacred to the Profane. East and West. A selection from his writings by Frithjof Schuon. World Wisdom. Inc. 2007. ISBN 193316357. The Essential Frithjof Schuon. World Wisdom. 2005. The Essential Writings of Frithjof Schuon. Ed. S. H. Nasser. 1986. Element. 1991. The Fullness of God. Frithjof Schuon on Christianity. Ed. James Cutzinger. 2004. Prayer Fashions Man. Frithjof Schuon on the Spiritual Life. Ed. James Cutzinger. 2005. René Guénon. Some Observations. Ed. William Stoddart. 2004. Songs for a Spiritual Traveler. Selected Poems. World Wisdom. 2002. Schuon was a frequent contributor to the quarterly journal Studies in Comparative Religion, along with Guénon, Kumarswamy, and many others, which dealt with religious symbolism and the traditionalist perspective. Perennialist, Traditionalist School website. Schuon website. Fons Vitae Books, Traditionalist School Books. Frithjof Schuon Archive. World Wisdom, Perennial Philosophy.